Welcome to Calm Revenge Stories. My husband got promoted, and the first thing he did was call me a freeloader. 15 years I paid every bill he never knew about $214,000. He wanted separate accounts, I agreed. Then his boss came for dinner, looked at me and said, "He deserves better." So I opened a folder, 47 pages, and I let him pay for it all. The engine of the sedan idled loud in the quiet neighborhood. The air conditioner blew cold air full blast against a face that had not been shaved in 3 days. Orange light from the Scottsdale street lamps cut through the dusty windshield. It illuminated the crumpled paper gripped in his sweating hand. Red ink stood out against the harsh white paper. Past due. Second notice. The house in front of him sat completely dark. There was no porch light. I used to leave the porch light on for him every single night for 15 years just in case he worked late. Not anymore. The driveway was empty. My car was gone. The heavy garage door was rolled up, revealing nothing inside but the bare concrete floor and 3 small cardboard boxes I had chosen to leave behind. His phone vibrated violently against the plastic center console. The screen lit up the dark cabin. He did not answer. He could not bring himself to touch it. It was the Human Resources Department from Crestline Logistics calling. Again. Beneath that notification sat 3 missed calls from Val Perry, the regional vice president. Beneath those were 5 missed calls from a defense attorney he could no longer afford to retain. I was not there to see his world finally cave in, but I know exactly how it looked. I know exactly how it sounded when the walls came down. He stared at the red ink on the bank notice. His jaw clenched tight enough to crack a tooth. He picked up the phone with a shaking hand. He pressed a name on the cracked screen. The line rang once. "Val, I can handle the regional accounts. I just need a minute to figure out the filing." "Handle." The voice on the speaker was sharp enough to cut glass. "You cannot handle a single expense report, Scott. The auditors are pulling everything right now." He opened his mouth. No sound came out. The line clicked. The dial tone hummed a flat, endless note. Scott dropped the phone. He rested his heavy forehead against the leather steering wheel. His breathing came in shallow, ragged gasps. The smell of hot vinyl and stale sweat filled the enclosed space. Beneath the bank notice in his damp hand was another piece of paper. Crisp, clean, printed just hours earlier on my home laser printer. Page 1 of a spreadsheet. The title read, "The Ledger, Kelly Household Financial Management 2009 to 2024. Prepared by Ren Kelly." The bottom line on that first page did not show a dollar amount. It just had a black arrow pointing to page 47. He had everything 3 weeks ago. He had a massive promotion. He had a golden future. He had me managing every invisible detail of his life so he could stand in the bright spotlight without ever tripping. Then I stopped. I just stopped paying the bills. I stopped setting the reminders. I stopped existing in his financial world. And it all turned to ash, faster than a dry newspaper in a fire. I did not feel victorious knowing he was sitting there in the dark. I just felt tired. My hands ached from washing them too much. A nervous habit I developed, trying to scrub away the feeling of counting his spare change. 3 weeks earlier, I was roasting a chicken. I stood at the kitchen island. Tuesday meant roast chicken. It was a routine, a system. As a financial controller at Hadley Construction, I liked systems. I liked numbers that balanced perfectly at the end of the month. I was 44 years old, wearing my usual gray slacks and a plain white blouse. I wore no jewelry, except a simple gold wedding band that felt a little looser on my finger these days. The garage door rumbled beneath my feet. The heavy wooden door to the kitchen swung open. Scott walked in. He smelled different immediately. Sharp, expensive, not the warm sandalwood he had worn for a decade. His leather dress shoes clicked hard against the tile floor. He carried a bottle of champagne by the neck in one hand. His phone was in the other. He wore a crisp Oxford shirt, unbuttoned at the collar. He was 46, but his smile belonged to a man 10 years younger. A salesman's smile. The kind of wide, confident grin that made people turn around in crowded restaurants. Scott did not look at the golden skin of the chicken resting on the cutting board. He did not lean in to kiss my cheek. He set the wet champagne bottle directly onto the stack of unopened mail on the counter. The damp glass rested right on top of a thick white envelope from Crestline Logistics. The corporate credit card statement. Regional sales manager, Scott said. He tapped his knuckles against the granite countertop twice. Effective Monday. I turned away from the hot stove, wiping my hands on a towel. That is great, Scott. Congratulations. Yeah, it is great. He reached past me, opened a glass cabinet, and pulled out a single champagne flute. One glass. Just for him. The cork popped with a loud crack. The pale wine fizzed over the rim, spilling onto the counter. Big changes coming, Wren. Big changes. Like what he took a long swallow. Like I am done carrying dead weight. The kitchen went very quiet. The oven hummed steadily in the background. We are separating accounts, he said, wiping his wet mouth with the back of his hand. Starting tomorrow. My money, my account. You want money, you earn your own. My hand gripped the wooden handle of the spatula. The wood pressed hard into my palm. I do earn $62K a year at a mid-level construction company. Scott gave a short, breathless laugh. I will be making 110 base plus commission. You are not in my league anymore, Wren. You are a... He snapped his fingers in the air, searching for the exact word to use. You have been freeloading off my potential for 15 years. My breathing stopped in my throat. I did not yell. I did not throw the heavy spatula at his chest. Instead, my brain did what it always did under pressure. It calculated in 2018 he forgot his student loan payments for 6 straight months. I paid $16,400 from my savings to catch it up. In June of last year, he overdrew his checking account while out with clients. $340. I covered it before the card declined. The major car repair right before Christmas. $1,200. He promised to pay me back from his bonus. He never did. I looked at his new silver watch, the crisp collar of his shirt, the expensive champagne bubbling in the glass. I had built the solid foundation he was standing on, brick by invisible brick. I set the spatula down on the counter. I moved very slowly. My voice dropped. It did not rise. It slowed down until each word fell like a heavy metal coin onto a glass table. Okay. Scott stopped mid-sip. He blinked twice. He had braced himself for crying, for a bitter fight, for me to beg him to reconsider the finances. Okay, what he asked, genuinely confused. Separate accounts. I agree. He stared at me. He tried to read my face, searching for a trick. He could not find one. Before he could speak again, his phone buzzed on the counter. A bright, cheerful notification chime echoed in the kitchen. Not a standard work email alert, not a calendar reminder, something entirely different. The salesman grabbed the phone quickly, shoving it deep into his pocket without looking at the screen. He picked up his champagne glass and walked down the hall toward the master bedroom. He shut the door behind him. The roast chicken sat on the warm stove, losing its heat. I stood perfectly still. My eyes drifted down to the kitchen counter, to the wet ring the champagne bottle had left on the stack of mail. The water soaked directly into the Crestline envelope. I had never opened his corporate mail in 15 years. I had never needed to. Later that night, the house was completely silent. Scott was asleep in the master bedroom, or perhaps lying awake texting in the dark. I sat alone in my den. It was a small, spare room I used as a home office. The glow of my laptop screen cast a pale blue wash over the painted walls. I double-clicked an icon on my cluttered desktop. The file was simply named Kelly Household Finance. I had started it during our very first year of marriage. Row after row, column after column. 15 years of raw data. Every late fee I had quietly paid. Every overdraft I had covered so his card would not decline at a business lunch. Every utility bill kept current. I scrolled down the page. Thousands of entries, tracking every dollar that flowed through our lives. I rubbed my hands together. They felt like dry, rough paper. Looking at the bright screen, a memory surfaced, sharp and entirely uninvited. I was 11 years old. The scratched wooden kitchen table in my childhood home. My mother sat there under a flickering fluorescent light, stacking pennies, nickels, and dimes into neat little towers. My father had packed his bags that morning. My mother had looked at me with red, swollen eyes and said he could not provide, so he left. I had sworn to myself, sitting in that old kitchen, that no one would ever say that about me. I would never be the one left behind because I could not pay the bills. I became the ultimate provider, the quiet manager, the invisible safety net. I had wrapped my entire identity around being useful, being necessary. And tonight, Scott had stood in our kitchen and called me a freeloader. I rested my elbows on the wooden desk. If we separated accounts, what did that actually mean? Did I stop paying the mortgage we shared? Did I remove my name from the auto pay on his car loan, from his expensive gym membership, from his phone bill? If I pulled my financial support, if I removed the safety net, everything he had built would collapse. He wanted separate accounts. He wanted to shed the dead weight holding him back. Fine. I would give him exactly what he asked for. I would show him what a freeloader really looked like. I turned my head. The stack of mail from the kitchen counter now sat on the far edge of my desk. The Crestline Logistics envelope was right on top. The paper was slightly warped from the champagne condensation. I did not open it. Not yet. I opened the top drawer of my desk, dropped the thick envelope inside, and slid the drawer shut. I left my office at Hadley Construction at 4 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. It was the first time I had left the building before sunset in 8 years. The Arizona heat was thick and suffocating as I pulled my car into the driveway. Bev Hoffman was standing by the chain-link fence separating our front yards. She was 58 years old and a retired paralegal. She held a green garden hose over a row of thirsty oleander bushes. The water splashed loudly against the dry dirt. She wore oversized sunglasses and a faded floral shirt. She turned her head as I stepped out of my car. She watched me walk across the hot concrete. She did not say hello. She just stared at my face for a long moment. "You look like you swallowed a box of nails," Bev said. She let the hose drop into the dirt. "What happened? Scott got promoted," I said. My voice was completely flat. "Regional sales manager. He wants separate accounts." Bev reached down and twisted the brass spigot. The water stopped flowing. The sudden silence in the yard felt heavy. "What exactly did you say to that?" I said. "Okay? Okay?" Bev nodded slowly. She wiped her wet hands on her denim shorts. She looked past me, staring at my empty front porch. 5 seconds passed. 10. "You know, my ex-husband got promoted too. 19 years ago. Vice president of sales. The very first thing he did was buy a silver Porsche. The second thing he did was stop looking at me when I spoke." I stood still. The dry wind blew a stray strand of hair across my cheek. I did not brush it away. "I still have my divorce binder," Bev said. Her tone was casual. Too casual. From when I went through it all, I built a massive file. I just could not throw the damn thing away. She left the sentence hanging in the hot air. She was a woman who had been screwed over in family court because she had not known about hidden assets until it was too late. She had spent the last 2 decades nursing a quiet, bitter resentment for men who thought a promotion made them untouchable. I did not ask to see the binder. Not yet. I just listened. I walked inside my empty house. The air conditioning kicked on with a low rumble. I set my purse on the kitchen counter. I made a choice right then. It was not a grand scheme for revenge. It was much simpler. He wanted separate accounts. He called me a freeloader. He was going to get exactly what he asked for, all of it. I spent Friday night and all of Saturday morning bathed in the harsh blue light of my computer monitor. My coffee turned cold in the ceramic mug. The house was dead quiet. The only sound was the rhythmic, relentless clicking of my computer mouse. I opened a brand new individual checking account at a local credit union. I logged into my company portal and rerouted my direct deposit. Then I began the tedious work of dismantling my invisible safety net. Click. I removed my name and routing number from the autopay on his luxury car loan. Click. I deleted my banking profile from his cell phone provider. Click. I canceled the recurring transfer that covered his expensive gym membership downtown. I left the mortgage alone. The house was in both of our names. I set up a manual transfer for exactly 50% of the monthly payment. He would have to log in and pay his half. He would have to remember the due date. I would not remind him. I stopped reminding him about his upcoming dental appointments. I threw away the postcard, reminding him to get his oil changed. I thought separating the financial plumbing of our marriage would make me feel something. Sadness. Regret. It did not. I just felt incredibly focused. Scott did not notice a single thing. He was entirely consumed by his new life. He was coming home later and later. He spent his evenings sitting on the living room sofa, staring at his phone and smiling at the screen. He wore that sharp new cologne every single day. Monday night of the second week arrived. Scott sent a brief text saying he was grabbing after-work drinks with the new sales team. He said he would not be home until 11. I walked into my den. The room was dark. I did not turn on the overhead light. I opened the top drawer of my desk. I reached past my heavy metal stapler and pulled out the warped white envelope from Crestline Logistics. I slid my finger under the paper flap and tore it open. I pulled out 3 pages of corporate credit card statements. As a financial controller, reading an expense report was like reading a children's book. The numbers told a very clear, undisputed story. I pulled 2 highlighters from my pen cup, yellow and pink. I started down the first column. Lunch at a deli near his office. $24. I marked it yellow. Business expense. A tank of premium gas. $60. Yellow. Then my pen stopped. Mastro's Steakhouse. $287. I checked the date. It was a Thursday night. He had told me he was at a mandatory team-building seminar. I pressed the pink highlighter over the black ink. I moved down the page. The Phoenician Resort. A spa treatment. $180. A Friday afternoon. Pink. K Jewelers. $640. Another Thursday evening. Pink. The pages grew steadily brighter. Pink line after pink line. Dinners, drinks, gifts, all of them charged to a corporate card belonging to Crestline Logistics. All of them happening on nights he claimed to be working late to secure his promotion. I did not cry. My jaw ached. I realized I had been grinding my teeth together for 3 straight hours. I was auditing my own husband just like I audited a dishonest vendor at work. The most painful part was not the obvious affair. It was not the expensive jewelry he bought for someone else. The deepest insult was the profound lack of respect. He had mailed the evidence of his betrayal directly to our shared mailbox. He did it because he genuinely believed I was too blind, too loyal, and too boring to ever open an envelope with his name on it. He thought I was a piece of furniture, a fixture that paid the bills and kept the lights on. I picked up my phone. I dialed the neighbor across the street. She answered on the second ring. "Can I see that divorce binder?" I asked. Wednesday afternoon brought a dry, blistering wind. I walked across the hot asphalt street to Bev's house. Her kitchen smelled strongly of roasted Folgers coffee lemon dish soap and the faint, powdery scent of indoor cats. A dark blue binder sat perfectly centered on her worn formica dining table. Thick yellow sticky notes protruded from the edges like bright feathers. The afternoon sun slanted heavily through the window blinds. It illuminated tiny specks of dust dancing in the quiet air. I set my canvas tote bag on the table. I pulled out my documents. First, I laid down the ledger. I had printed it that morning at the office. 47 pages of densely packed spreadsheet rows. Next, I set down 6 months of our joint bank statement. Finally, I placed the Crestline corporate credit card statement on top. The pink highlighter ink practically glowed in the sunlight. Bev pushed her reading glasses up the bridge of her nose. She opened the ledger first. She flipped through the thick stack of paper. Her eyes scanned the columns. She let out a low, slow whistle. 47 pages. 15 years, I replied. I kept my hands folded in my lap. $214,000. Bev looked up over the rim of her glasses. Her eyes were wide. You paid $214,000 more than him toward this marriage. Give or take, I said. I sat perfectly straight in the wooden chair. That is not counting the things I could not track on a spreadsheet. The hours spent on hold with his car insurance company. The weekends spent organizing his tax receipts, reminding him to call his mother on her birthday so she would not cry. Bev gently set the spreadsheet aside. She picked up the corporate credit card statement. She ran her index finger over the bright pink lines. And this, she asked, 4 months of personal charges on his company card. High-end dinners, jewelry, a luxury spa day. He was not taking me to those places. You know exactly what this means. It means corporate fraud and an affair. Bev leaned forward. She tapped the blue binder with her knuckles. Arizona is a community property state. Everything earned during the marriage belongs to both of you. His new salary, his upcoming commissions, 50% is yours by law. Separating the checking accounts does not change the law. She picked up the corporate statement again. And this is called dissipation of marital assets. When he spends community money on an affair, a judge takes that very personally. They can award you much more than 50% to make you whole. She looked me dead in the eye. And the corporate fraud. That is a separate legal exposure. His employer will not be forgiving. I looked down at the table. I had the printed pages. I had the highlighted proof of his lies. I had a neighbor with deep legal knowledge ready to guide me. I had everything I needed to destroy him. I felt a sudden surge of absolute power. It rushed through my chest like cold water. I had trapped him. He had no idea the cage was already locked, but the feeling faded almost immediately. It drained away, leaving a strange, echoing silence behind my ribs. I stared at the 47 pages of the ledger. $214,000. 15 years of my life reduced to black ink on white paper. I had tied my entire worth as a human being to my ability to manage his chaos. A quiet, terrifying question whispered in the back of my mind. I should have ignored it. I could not. If I took away the spreadsheet, what was left? If I stopped being the woman who fixed everything, who paid for everything, who covered every mistake, who was Wren Kelly, did I have any value at all if I was not useful to him? I did not have an answer. My hands felt cold. I reached out and gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. My phone vibrated violently against the wood, shattering the quiet moment in the kitchen. I picked it up, a text message from Scott, glowing on the screen. The boss wants to come for dinner on Sunday. Make it nice. It is important. I stared at the glowing letters. He was commanding me to perform. He wanted the boring, reliable wife to cook a perfect meal to impress the regional vice president who had just given him a massive promotion. Bev leaned over the table. She read the text message upside down. A slow, wicked smile spread across her face. She picked up her coffee mug. Well, well, Bev said softly. How nice do you want to make it? The smell of spicy peanut sauce and fried basil filled the kitchen on Thursday evening. Scott had actually come home for dinner. It was the first time all week. He brought Thai takeout in white plastic bags and dropped them on the counter. He did not ask what I wanted to eat. He simply unpacked the containers and handed me a fork. The television in the living room droned in the background. A sports announcer analyzed a football game in a steady, monotonous voice. Scott stood on the opposite side of the kitchen island. He briefed me on his schedule as if I were his administrative assistant. Val Perry is coming to dinner on Sunday at 6 o'clock, he said between bites of noodles. I need the menu to be impressive. The house needs to be spotless. I chewed my food slowly. I nodded. I did not say a word. He pointed his fork at me. And Ren, try to be interesting. Talk about something other than your spreadsheets. Val is used to a certain kind of people. High-level people. Just make an effort to keep up. I swallowed the dry food in my mouth. I looked past his shoulder. The stack of unopened mail still sat exactly where it had been for 2 weeks. He had not touched it. He was beginning to receive the mail directly because I had stopped sorting it for him. He just let it pile up. His phone vibrated on the granite counter. The screen flashed brightly. It was an automated call from the credit card company. Scott glanced at the caller identification. His jaw tightened. He reached out and pressed the red button to reject the call. He shoved the phone into his pocket and went back to eating. He had no idea how quickly the ground was crumbling beneath his expensive shoes. By Friday night, the exhaustion was settling deep into my bones. It was 11 o'clock. I sat at the small desk in my den. The bright glare of my laptop screen was the only light in the room. I was compiling the final evidence package to send to Bev. I had a browser tab open with the scanned Crestline credit card statements. Another tab held 6 months of our joint bank records. A third tab displayed the ledger, updated with the very last row of data. I had been sitting in that wooden chair since 8 o'clock. My eyes were burning. They felt like they were full of hot sand. My neck was stiff, and my head felt incredibly heavy. The distant sound of the sports channel echoed from the living room. Scott was out there watching television just like he did every Friday night. I took off my reading glasses. I pressed the heels of my hands into my dry eyes, rubbing them hard. My ears were ringing with a faint, high-pitched whine from staring at the bright spreadsheet for 3 unbroken hours. I should have heard his footsteps in the hall. I did not. When I opened my eyes and lowered my hands, Scott was standing in the doorway of the den. He held a half-empty can of beer. His eyes were bloodshot. The house was suddenly entirely silent. The television was off. I had not heard him turn it off. He took a step into the room. His gaze was fixed on the bright screen of my laptop. He saw the Crestline Logistics logo at the top of the scanned document. "What the hell are you doing?" His voice was low. It was not loud, but it was dangerous. Working. I reached for the mouse to close the window. My fingers were stiff from typing. I moved too slowly. He stepped closer, his heavy shoes loud on the hardwood floor. Working on Crestline statements. He pointed a thick finger at the screen. "Were you going through my mail? Your company sends those statements to our home address." I kept my voice perfectly level. "Our address, Scott. The mail comes to our house. That is my business." He slammed his beer can down on the edge of my desk. Brown liquid splashed over the rim. "That is my career. You have absolutely no right to look at that. You are right. It is your business." I pushed my chair back and stood up. "And they are your charges. Mastro's Steakhouse, the Phoenician, K Jewelers." His face flushed dark red. The defensive anger flared instantly. He went on the attack. "You are spying on me," he sneered. "You are sitting in the dark, going through my trash, because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of my success. Scott, you are spending thousands of dollars of company money on someone else. I bet you are planning something right now." He took another step forward, backing me against the bookshelf. some little revenge scheme. Because you cannot handle being the lesser earner. You cannot handle that I am moving up and you are stuck." He breathed heavily. The smell of stale beer and his sharp new cologne washed over me. You know what he said, his voice dropping into a vicious whisper. "I am calling the bank tomorrow morning. I am taking your name off the joint checking account. All of it. Every single dime. You want to snoop. You want to act like a victim. See how you survive without my paycheck." My stomach dropped. A cold, sharp panic pierced my chest. It was my absolute worst fear materializing right in front of me. Being cut off. Being left with nothing. My mind instantly flooded with images of my mother sitting at the kitchen table, counting pennies, because my father had taken everything. Scott reached around me. He grabbed my laptop with one hand and snapped the screen shut. "I am keeping this until after Sunday," he said. He tucked the computer under his arm. "You are not ruining this dinner for me. You are not ruining my life." He turned and walked out of the den. I heard his heavy footsteps echo down the hall. I heard the master bedroom door shut. I heard the lock click into place. I stood frozen against the bookshelf. He had my laptop. The digital files were on that hard drive. My access to our joint account would be gone by morning. The dinner with Val Perry was 2 days away. My carefully planned advantage was completely gone. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the cold floor. I pulled my knees to my chest. My phone rested in my pocket. I did not take it out. I did not call Bev. I just sat there in the dark. I stayed on the floor all night. By 5 o'clock on Saturday morning, the gray light of the Scottsdale dawn began to filter through the window blinds. A quail called out in the backyard. It was the only sound in the dead neighborhood. The house was freezing. The air conditioning was still blowing steadily. Scott always liked the thermostat set to 68 degrees. I was shivering in my thin cotton shirt. I had been shivering for hours, but I had not stood up to change the temperature. I looked slowly around the den. I saw the heavy tax law textbooks on the bottom shelf. I saw the accounting manual. I looked at the framed certified public accountant license hanging on the wall. Beside it sat a small silver frame holding a wedding photograph. Scott looked incredibly young in the picture. He was smiling that massive, confident smile. His arm was wrapped tightly around my waist. I was smiling too, but my eyes were looking down, checking to make sure the folds of my white dress were perfectly arranged. Sitting on the cold floor, I started to count. I was not counting dollars. I was not calculating interest rates or late fees. I was calculating myself. 15 years. $214,000. Was that my entire value? Was I nothing more than a series of numbers on a spreadsheet? If I removed the bank statements, if I removed the saved overdrafts, if I took away my ability to fix his mistakes. Who was Wren Kelly? I thought about my mother again. She had spent hours counting coins because she had been abandoned. She had no safety net. I had spent the last 15 years counting coins for someone else. I did it because I was terrified of becoming her. I became the perfect manager, the ultimate provider of stability. But what was the result? It was exactly the same. I was sitting on a cold floor, counting in the dark entirely alone. The ledger was not a weapon. I finally understood that. The ledger was a cage. I had locked myself inside it for 15 years. I had trapped myself in the role of the useful wife because I truly believed that if I ever stopped managing things, I would have no value at all. Scott had called me a freeloader. The most painful part of that insult was not the lie. The painful part was that a tiny, frightened piece of my own heart actually believed him. I believed that without my utility, without my spreadsheets, I was nothing. I placed my hands flat against the hardwood floor. I pushed myself up. My joints ached from sitting still for so long. I walked out of the den. I walked through the dark kitchen and opened the sliding glass door. I stepped out into the backyard. The morning air was dry and cool. The sharp, bitter smell of the creosote bushes filled my lungs. I took a deep breath. I stood perfectly still on the concrete patio. I did not need Scott to see the ledger, to prove my worth. I did not need him to validate my existence. I already knew exactly what I had done. I knew exactly who I was. The numbers were not something I needed to use to beg for his respect. The numbers were simply the truth. And the truth was enough. It had always been enough. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen glowed brightly in the early morning shadow. I dialed the number. Bev answered on the first ring. Her voice was raspy from sleep. "Ren, are you okay? It is barely 6 o'clock. Do you still have those backup copies I emailed to you?" I asked. I heard the sound of rustling sheets. "Honey, I printed 3 full sets." A long silence stretched between us over the phone line. The air conditioning unit hummed outside the house. "Good," I said softly. I looked back inside the house toward the dark kitchen, where the dining room table sat empty. "What are you wearing to dinner tomorrow?" Sunday afternoon settled over the house with a suffocating heat. Inside my kitchen, the air smelled intensely of melted butter, roasted garlic, and fresh thyme. I rolled the heavy pastry dough for the beef Wellington. The sharp steel blade of my chef knife hit the wooden cutting board in a steady rhythm. Chop, chop, chop. I was perfectly controlled. I had set the dining room table 2 hours early with crisp, white linen napkins, polished silver, and 3 tall white candles. Scott walked in at 2 o'clock, wearing his sharp, new tailored suit. He looked at the golden pastry, then at the perfect dining table, narrowing his eyes. He was highly suspicious of the domestic perfection. "You said to make it nice," I told him, wiping my hands on a cotton towel. "This is nice." I gave him a calm, completely empty smile. It was the first time I had smiled in 3 weeks. I wore a perfectly fitted black dress. It was the kind of dress a woman wore when she meant absolute business. My phone vibrated with a text message from Bev across the street. She told me to give him hell. Scott did not know about the heavy wooden buffet drawer directly behind his dining chair. He did not know that beneath a stack of extra napkins sat a thick manila folder. At exactly 6 o'clock, Val Perry rang the heavy brass doorbell. She wore a sharp navy blazer and bright pearl earrings. Her eyes scanned my plain black dress and bare neck in one single calculating second. She found me lacking. During dinner, I became completely invisible. Val and Scott discussed corporate strategy while I quietly cleared the salad plates and served the tender beef. Val noted the tasteful furniture and Scott's shiny silver cufflinks. Then she looked directly at me. "You know, Scott, this promotion was the exact right call," Val said, placing her heavy silver fork down. "You have the executive presence." She let her eyes linger on his face. "He deserves better." She thought I was dead weight holding a brilliant man down. The dining room went completely silent. 4 heavy seconds passed. I placed the crystal water pitcher onto the table very gently. "You know what, Val?" I said. "You are right." I pushed my chair back, walked to the wooden buffet, and opened the top drawer. I pulled out the thick manila folder and walked back to the head of the table. The hot candle wax popped. Scott stopped chewing. His jaw froze. I opened the folder. The fresh printer ink smelled sharp in the warm room. I placed the first page directly next to his cooling dinner plate. "This is the ledger," I said. My voice was calm and precise. 15 years of our household finances. Every mistake I covered. Everything I managed behind the scenes so you could wear nice suits. Scott let out a tight, nervous laugh. "Ren, this is not the time." "Page 12, I said, turning the crisp white paper. "Your student loan. 6 years of minimum payments I made from my own savings. $16,400. Scott dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the fine porcelain plate. "Page 23, I continued. "Overdraft fees I covered so you would not know your personal account was empty. $4,212. I turned another page. My hands did not shake. "Page 38. Car insurance premium increases after your 2 at-fault accidents. Both times I negotiated the new rates and paid the difference. The annoyance on his face vanished, replaced by a sickly gray. Sweat formed along his hairline. Page 47, I said, flipping to the very end. The total amount I covered beyond my equal share of our joint expenses over the last 15 years. $214,000. I looked directly into Val Perry's eyes. That is the freeloader. Scott slammed both hands flat onto the table. Dark red wine splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth. This is insane. You stole my personal mail. I reached into the folder a second time and pulled out the corporate credit card statements. The thick pink highlighter marks glowed brightly. I set the papers right next to Val's wine glass. These are Scott's corporate card charges for the past 4 months, I explained at a polite volume. Mastro's Steakhouse, the Phoenician Resort and Spa, K Jewelers. Those were personal dates. The total is $8,600 of your company money. Val picked up the top page. Her eyes darted across the pink lines. Her face froze completely solid. Using corporate funds to finance a personal affair was a massive ethics violation. Val had signed his promotion paperwork just 3 weeks ago. She had vouched for his character. Her own career was suddenly in extreme danger. She looked across the burning candles and saw a massive liability with her own signature attached to it. You put personal charges on a corporate card? Val said. Her voice carried across the room like a gunshot. I told the board of directors you had absolute integrity. That is not even the point. The point is that I put my professional name right next to yours. Scott stood up quickly, his chair crashing to the hardwood floor. Wren, you cannot do this. She is lying to you. Val stared straight ahead at the wall. Sit down, Scott. Her voice was ice cold. It was the voice of a boss terminating an employee. I closed the manila folder and slid it back across the table. I knew my own worth now. The numbers were just the truth. I will be filing for divorce tomorrow morning, I said quietly. Arizona is a community property state, Scott. A 50-50 split on all marital assets, plus a formal dissipation claim for the affair. I looked at Val, and I imagine Crestline Logistics will want to conduct their own internal audit. I slid the simple gold wedding band over my knuckle and set it down next to the plate of beef Wellington. The small piece of metal clinked against the hard porcelain. Monday morning arrived with blinding sunlight washing over the desert mountains. I sat at my desk at Hadley Construction at exactly 8 o'clock. A hot ceramic mug of black coffee rested next to my keyboard. The heavy office printer hummed down the carpeted hallway. My cell phone showed 3 missed calls from Scott. I did not call him back. Next to my phone sat a formal stamped copy of my divorce petition. My attorney had filed the paperwork electronically at exactly 2 minutes past 7. Scott thought he had destroyed my evidence when he took my laptop on Friday night. He forgot that I was a professional financial controller. I backed up absolutely everything. I had made 3 complete physical sets. I took a slow sip of the bitter coffee. I had woken up at 5 o'clock that morning in my own house. I had slept on the living room sofa, but it was still my property. Scott had not come home. I watered the front yard as the sun came up and walked across the quiet street to feed Bev's cats. Bev had stood in her front window, giving me an enthusiastic thumbs up. I thought about my mother, sitting at her scratched wooden table years ago. She had counted pennies in a panic because she had no choice. I was counting because I actively chose to walk away. A notification chimed on my monitor. An email from the Human Resources Department at Crestline Logistics appeared. Val Perry was copied. The subject line read, Urgent Internal Audit Required. I deleted the email without opening it. It was not my job to manage his mess anymore. He wanted separate accounts. He got them. My cell phone vibrated. I picked it up. How are you feeling? Bev asked over the speaker. I looked at the bright Arizona sun hitting the glass window. I am feeling expensive, I said. Bev laughed out loud. I smiled. It felt strange and wonderful. I ended the call and moved the mouse across my computer screen. I found the old spreadsheet titled Kelly Household Finance and dragged it into the digital trash bin. I opened a fresh blank document and typed a new title at the very top. Kelly Personal Finance. It had one single name, one single column. It belonged entirely to me. Have you ever found yourself keeping a silent tally in your own life? It is incredibly easy to fall into the exact same trap Wren built for herself. You start by doing small favors. You cover a missed bill here. You schedule a forgotten appointment there. You smooth over the rough edges of someone else's mistakes so they do not have to feel the friction. You do it out of love or perhaps out of a deep, unacknowledged fear of instability. Somewhere along the line, without ever meaning to, you tie your entire human value to how incredibly useful you are to your partner. You become the invisible safety net. But here is the hard educational truth you need to take away from this story. Your worth as a human being is not measured by your ability to manage someone else's chaos. A healthy partnership is built on mutual respect and shared responsibility, not on one person silently absorbing all the financial and emotional debt, while the other takes all the credit. When you constantly fix someone's mistakes, you are not helping them grow. You are just enabling their bad behavior while simultaneously burning yourself to the ground. You do not have to purchase your place in a relationship with acts of service, endless spreadsheet management, or financial bailouts. You are inherently valuable simply because you exist, not because of what you can produce, fix, or protect. Take a hard look at your own relationships today. Are you exhausted from carrying the mental and financial load for someone who completely dismisses your invisible labor the second they get ahead? Have you ever realized that your constant helping and fixing was actually keeping you trapped in a cage of your own making? I really want to hear your stories. Have you ever had to finally drop the safety net and walk away to find your own peace? Share your experiences in the comments below, because your brave story might be exactly what another woman needs to hear today to finally close her own ledger.